things to say.
Help them dancing that way out. Oh, brand new baby.
out. Okay? And so I wanted to get people excited. And David emailed me. I don't remember when David emailed me, but at some point David reached out to me and was like, hey, man, what are you doing? Like, what's this Van Halen Rising thing? I said, I've got this book. It's going to come out. It's going to come out next year. So this is 2014. And so, people like David and other Van Halen fans started getting interested and getting engaged. And I just kept at it every day. Drip, 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 another picture, another little post. I would put up little teaser things about the book and what was going to happen. I did a few podcast interviews. I did one where I really sort of laid out the basic ideas I was going to talk about in the book, and it got shared quite a bit. And that was not what I necessarily expected, but people really seemed to be very, very interested in this. And because I was just a fan who wanted to write this book, people would ask me questions about, oh, is it true that Gene Simmons, this is before the book, that Gene Simmons tried to help Van Halen? I say, yeah, I've got the whole story in the book. I really do. I've got it down. I mean, I've got it nailed down. People are like, wow, that's going to be cool. So people got excited about this book before it came out. And so, again, in the back of my mind, in the front of my mind now, I know, right? You have to be able to put yourself out there and say, look, I'm making this book. You can't sort of hide, right? Because part of me wants to be like, well, if it fails, I'd rather fail in a little small way. It kind of comes out. Like the circus book, it failed in a small way. You understand? I had to know because I didn't really tell anybody about it. So it came and went, and nothing happened. And so I kept reminding myself that that's what's going to happen if you don't promote. And I just really tried to promote it the best I could. In October of 2014, I delivered the manuscript to the press. And so then we're still waiting, right? And so I'm still kind of like laying out my ideas about the book where I can online, telling people about it, really trying not to be shy about it. One of the things I did, which I would really recommend to anyone who wants to start a project like mine or something similar, is I built a website. Well, not personally, but had some guys I know build a website. But I set up an email list, and I would get people to subscribe to the email list. This actually became very, very important in the final push for the book when it comes out. And so I would, on this email list, start giving people leftovers from the book. So basically what I decided to do was, look, I had more material than I could ever fit in the book. There are some people, God bless them, uber fans of Van Halen, who want to know why I didn't shove everything into the book. They think of a book as like as much stuff as you can shove between the covers. That's a good book, man. 500 pages about Van Halen. I had to tell them, well, not everything fit in the story. You can't just keep stuffing stuff in there just because you want to. So the stuff I had left over, I just gave it away. I don't know anyone subscribed to my email list. Stories about Van Halen brothers and David Lee Roth posing as punk rockers on the Sunset Strip in 1977. I didn't bring that picture along. Hilarious story. They dressed up like punk rockers. They fooled a photographer from France into thinking that they were a new punk band from Scotland called the Enemas. And this fanzine from Los Angeles called Slash, okay, a very famous punk fanzine, they put Van Halen on the back cover. These guys are dressed like punk rockers in rag clothes. I mean, hilarious, right? I couldn't fit it in the book. I just gave this stuff away to people. People would forward the emails around and get excited. So, book comes out. What I did when I launched the book, and this I got to say, you get people excited and things happen. So I had two friends of mine, one in Hawaii, Janice, and one in Pasadena, California, my friend Roger. Okay, I interviewed them both for the book. I had interviewed lots of their mutual friends because they grew up in Los Angeles and had been around when Van Halen was rising to the top in Los Angeles. And they say, let's have a party. And I remember when they first bring it up to me, I'm thinking like, well, you mean like let's go to Chili's and do like some like queso and stuff? I'm like, that sounds like a really good idea. I'll be hungry because I was going to do a book event at a bookstore in Pasadena. I was like, that sounds great. Let's have a party. They're like, no, let's have a party with a band. I was like, okay. Let's have a party with bands, and we'll hire a Van Halen tribute band. We can't get Van Halen to play, but we'll get Van Halen to play, who, by the way, did a fantastic job. Highly recommend it. I hope they come to Oklahoma. They were great. They kicked ass. Okay, so I had this party. This thing, if Janice and Roger are listening, it was a struggle. It was a struggle to put together. I'm in Tulsa. Roger's in Pasadena. Janice is in Hawaii. We're trying to put this together. We're trying to get musicians to play because we have the tribute band, and we have local guys who kind of came up on the same scene with Van Halen who are going to play too in this bar in Los Angeles that was called the Handlebar, in Pasadena, but Van Halen played here. So it was really cool. It was a bar that Van Halen had played when they were a bar band. So this thing comes together, and it was great. If you guys checked out the Van Halen news desk, all these people came. The former bassist of Van Halen, the guy who was in the band in the early 70s before Van Halen really has the final lineup, formed, shows up, a guy named Mark Stone. He played bass with the tribute band. It was great. It was great. And then the night before, what I did was I had a book signing at a bookstore called Romans Books in Pasadena. It's an old institution bookstore there. And I was able to get a special guest to come out. This guy right here. Anyone know who that is? Ted Templeman, the guy who produced all the Van Halen records. And so I had gotten to know Ted. He had been really helpful to me with the book and really believed in what I was doing and was cool enough to come out and sign books. And so, I mean, look at the picture there, right? Me, I'm thinking to myself, how did this happen? I know, I changed shirts. I got the same shirt on tonight. I figured it was my lucky shirt. You see that? Same watch, same shirt, same everything. I wanted to make sure. I don't know, maybe it's the clothes. I don't want to. So they said the man or the clothes, maybe it's the clothes. We'll stick with the same outfit. And, you know, how do I get from, right, the guy here in the pink shirt to this guy? You know, and I'm just telling you, I just kept going forward. When I got things that had bad news, Eddie Van Halen won't talk to me. Hurt me. I was hurt. I mean, right? You're like, come on. I wrote this really nice email, and I understand why. It's okay. But I wrote this really nice email to Eddie, and I get this email back from his publicist saying, no, thank you, very quickly. David Lee Roth blows me off. You know, I've done all this work, really worked hard on this book, trying to basically pay tribute to these guys. I'm such a super fan. And, you know, but in the end, it was just, got the obstacle in your way, you just got to go around it or go through it and just figure it's just going to have to be what it is. And I didn't, again, if you would have told me a year before this was going to happen, I would have said, there's no way Ted Templeman was going to do this. A friend of mine said, why don't you just ask him? About 2 months before this. I was like, okay. So I call him up and I say, hey, Ted, would you come to Pasadena? And he's like, well, I've never done anything like that before, but yeah, I like your book. I mean, because he had read an advanced copy of the book. I really like your book. I'll come do that. I'm like, the guy who produced Van Halen is going to come hang out with me and sign books? The guy who produced the Doobie Brothers, Little Feat, Montrose, Sammy Hagar's VOA. Looking at you, Goodspeed. Right? This man, this rock and roll legend is going to come hang out with me? To me, I mean, this was incredible. This was the guy who was in the studio, who went down into the basement with Van Halen night after night when those guys were working on their songs to help them put their songs together, to figure out which songs they were going to record. Came in and did it. And so, you know, to kind of close for you guys tonight, I want to just emphasize, you know, just be willing to take a risk. And I'm not saying take a crazy risk. I'm not saying mortgage your house and sell your children off for cash to start a business. I'm saying take a risk that seems to be something that's out of your comfort zone. Take that little leap of faith and just do it. Because, again, could this have been, all this thing been a big, huge disaster for me? The book could have been a debacle? Maybe. But it would have been, in the end, life would have went on. My wife still would have loved me, I think. She's wearing the Van Halen Rising shirt, by the way, so I think she still loves me. And it would have been all okay. So take a risk. And again, for me too, it was more of a struggle. Years of struggling with this to come to the place where I was like, I'm going to actually do this. A lot more time struggling internally than the years I took struggling to get the book published. And again, the publishers, all the stuff about the guy in the pink shirt, all that stuff was difficult. But for me to kind of get to the place where I'm going to do this, that was the hardest thing. And then have some fun and get excited. I really, really find if you're enthusiastic and invested, if you're like, I'm doing this because I'm excited about this, if you can get other people excited about it, other people will get on board if they can see you're really engaged and really passionate about what you're doing here. And so I would say just throw yourself out there and see. It might work, it might not, but if it doesn't, it's okay. And that's all I got for you guys. Thank you so much. So, happy to take questions. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer whatever on any topic you'd like to ask me other than my shirt choice. Yeah.
So you're at Tulsa now?
I am.
How has the university received success?
Great question. I'm no longer working for the university. Now, I know it's going to sound like, I know what we're going to think it's X equals Y or whatever the word is here. What ended up happening to me was my wife got this great job in Tulsa. And so I was actually doing a commute for years from 2010 to May of 2015. I was driving from Tulsa to Springfield, Missouri and being gone during the week. And so it all sort of came to a head eventually when we had twins. I don't mean that to sound the way it sounded. It didn't come to a head, but it was sort of when we had twin babies, it was just, it could not go on any longer, and I resigned the position. That was something that I had to do for my family ultimately, but I do understand that was something that was a very stressful and difficult decision to make. I had tenure, and we were kind of caught between these two things. I have a lot of family in Tulsa. My wife has a great job. We like Tulsa. I've got this job in Springfield. So that's actually when I resigned the position, which, I love being a professor, but it ended up being something that was just not workable. So yeah. So I don't know. That's a good question. Other questions? Someone else had a question, right? Nobody? Yeah. Uh-huh. I did. Yeah, so I talked to him back in 2012 or 13. He was really friendly. So the backstory for people who don't know, Michael Anthony is the guy who got pushed out of Van Halen for Eddie's son, Wolfgang, who plays in the band. I didn't ask him anything about the current politics of Van Halen, but he was very happy to talk about the old days. I always tell the story because it's so great, but, I said to him, well, Michael, I said, I know there must have been a lot of friction in the band. He was talking a little bit about the tensions between Roth and Eddie a little bit, but then he said, well, that really wasn't the big issue. It was more between Alex and Eddie. There was more tension. And I said, oh, yeah, what ended up happening? He told me that, well, Alex and Eddie would get into fist fights. They wouldn't just they would argue about a song, and eventually one of them would throw down the guitar, the other one would throw down the drumsticks, and they would basically throw down in the practice space. And he talked about how Alex was bigger and stronger and would inevitably get on top of Eddie and be punching him, but would be very careful not to hurt his hands. So punch him in the chest, punch him in the gut, bruise him up over there, that's fine, but we're not going to hurt Eddie's fingers because Eddie's fingers make us money. So, he was really cool to talk to, very unaffected by fame from what I could tell, and didn't sound the least bit embittered. And so that was the thing, like you're sort of listening for well, those guys did this, but at least on the phone with me for that hour and a half or whatever I talked to him, he seemed very much sort of at peace with saying this is the way it is and life will go on. Yes, sir. You're my man. You're my man. Come on up here. You got door prizes, koozies. Get this man a koozie. Yeah. That was the case, and that was the thing I tried to really make the case to some of the publishers to say, look, they have a story, but this is not their story, right? I was trying to tell the book from the story from the perspective of all the people who are around Van Halen, the kids who went to high school with these guys, the guys who helped them haul gear, their roadies, the people around who saw it from the outside. Now, I wanted to talk to those guys, but yeah, you're right. I mean, the thing about authorized biographies is the individual gets to say, we're not talking about that. And to be honest with you, it would have been a very difficult, let's just imagine an alternate universe where David Lee Roth says, yes, but I get to have final say over the manuscript. And then you're like thinking, well, it's money, potentially more money, potentially, depending on what the deal, who knows what the deal would be, the arrangement would be. But even if he didn't want any money, he might just say, if you want me to talk to you, I need to be able to have the final say over what's in the book. That would have been a very difficult decision for me to make, because you're like, it's David Lee Roth. So yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so that's the thing about an authorized biography. Yes, sir? Yeah. No. I never heard one piece of, no, I never heard anything from anybody suggesting I shouldn't write the book. I did hear through the grapevine that Eddie and Alex might one day write their own biography. I have that from a source where I think it's pretty accurate. I don't know if that'll ever happen. That may have just been idle talk, but the story basically being the brothers want to write a book together. So no, but what I always told myself, if that ever ended up happening, anyone ever read Hammer of the Gods? If you haven't read it, if you like Reich biographies, it's a great biography. It came out in 1995. A guy named Stephen Davis wrote it, one of my favorites. And so the book comes out. It's a book about Led Zeppelin's history, right up to the 80s. And Jimmy Page, the guitarist from Led Zeppelin, calls it trash or rubbish. He probably called it rubbish. This is utter rubbish. To some magazine, Robert Plant trashed the author. I think it's the biggest selling rock biography of all time. So, honestly, I was like, if those guys want to try, I don't want them to. I'd be very upset if they did. But, it's not exactly something that would prevent a book from being successful if you have people who are going to be in a position of power to make a splash about it. We don't want this book to come out. I mean, for some people, that's like, I got to read this book now. If they don't want it out. I mean, for me, that was like even better. That when I heard Jimmy Page called it rubbish, I thought there's got to be a lot of true stuff in there he doesn't want me to know. So I wanted to read it. Other questions? Who told them to name the Van Halen? So the story goes that there was a band meeting, and supposedly Roth was the one who decided to here's the thing that ended up happening. This is a funny story, I'll tell. So the brothers, their first band name, when they had a power trio, their first real band they had was a band called Genesis. They played in and around Pasadena. Again, they're teenagers, they're like 14 years old. They're called Genesis. And there's some flyers you can see on the internet called Genesis. The story goes that Eddie and Alex are in a record store in Pasadena, and they're going through the letters. They're looking, Gentle Giant, Genesis? And they pull out the record, Nursery Crimes record, this record from 1972, and Eddie looks at Alex and says, well, I guess we've got a record out, Alex. And they held it out, and then they changed the band name. And so then it got changed to Mammoth. But what ended up happening, there was a band in Los Angeles that was already working and performing called Mammoth. And so eventually they had to have another band meeting, and they changed the band name to Van Halen. Ross supposedly was the one who suggested it. Anyone else have a question? I'm happy to answer any and all questions. Yeah?
Two-part question.
Okay.
I read the book, and it's awesome. I think the power of the book is the number of interviews, but what were those 2 or 3 interviews that whenever you got that person to talk, you said, that's...
For sure, Templeman. For sure. Because Templeman was the guy who was able to... Gene Simmons was the guy who saw the talent of Van Halen and tried to sign Van Halen, get him a record deal. But Ted Templeman was the guy who got them a record deal and saw the talent of Eddie Van Halen and saw what was special about the band. He was able to give me that perspective of what he saw, the strengths and weaknesses. And he was very, if you read the book, he was very honest. One of the things that's, again, tremendous amount of admiration I have for the band, for David Lee Roth particularly. Ted Templeman told me on the record in the book, he said, I loved the band, I loved Eddie Van Halen, I wanted to sign the band, so he gave them a record deal. He goes, but after I got them in the studio and started working with them from some demo recordings, in other words, some first recordings they're going to do, he goes, I was really scared. I'm like, what are you scared about? Well, David Lee Roth couldn't sing. Oh, okay. I'm like, is that on the record? He goes, yeah, it's on the record. I thought Dave couldn't sing very well. All right, and this is a guy who knows about good vocals. Listen to the Doobie Brothers records, listen to Carly Simon. I mean, he knows Little Feat. He knows what good vocals are. And so, wow, I'm like, wow. And so this whole thing ends up happening where he tells me the story on the record that he had an idea that maybe there should be another singer for the Van Halen. Just crossed his mind. He said, I maybe talked with one other person. He said it wasn't ever a plan, wasn't anything going to happen with it, but I was worried because I got this great guitar player, got this really good band with some really good songs, but I don't think the singer's very good. He thought about getting Sammy Hagar to join Van Halen. True. So when Ted Templeman told me that, and again, that had been rumored, but he was like, yeah. He's like, and again, he's like, there was no game. There wasn't like we were like moving towards this. He just thought it crossed my mind. But then he told me, he said, look, but I knew. I said, look, I can work with this guy. I'll figure out what he does well. We'll work around the things he doesn't do well. He writes great lyrics. He's smart. He's funny. He's a great entertainer. This guy should front this band. And they went forward. And God bless Templeman for that. Templeman told me I would have made the biggest mistake in rock history if I had taken apart that band. He said it would have been the biggest mistake in the history of rock and roll. So when I got Templeman to talk, that was huge.
Second part of the question is, what was, from a band perspective, obviously that's why you were writing the book, story. What was the biggest surprise to you whenever you said, that's a surprise I didn't know about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the surprise to me was really getting down to the nitty-gritty about the Gene Simmons story. So Gene Simmons at the time, in 1976, he's in a band called Kiss. Kiss is the biggest band in the world, arguably, in 1976. And the whole issue of what Gene Simmons was trying to do with Van Halen, he sees them in a club in Los Angeles, he takes them to New York, and he tries to get them a record deal. And there was all these stories about what Gene's motivations were for doing this. And when I really got down into the brass tacks with this, to really find out that I think Gene really did want to try to sincerely help Van Halen. It wasn't a money grab. It was on all the stories that you sort of heard, maybe rumors weren't necessarily true, and that unlike some individuals who have had the opportunity to control the publishing of bands, so you guys may or may not know that one of the most valuable aspects of a musician's income is the publishing from the songs. And so famously or infamously, John Bon Jovi held on to a band called Skid Row's publishing. And so when Skid Row sold 2 million records in 1989, John Bon Jovi collected the revenue from their publishing rights for their band. Gene Simmons could have probably done that. Gene Simmons probably could have said to Van Halen, I'm gonna control your publishing. Like, in other words, sign this paper here. These guys probably would have signed anything he put in front of them. We own your publishing now. Think of the millions of dollars. And so for Gene Simmons to basically tear up, and you can read the book. I mean, Gene had his reasons why he did what he did, but to kind of tear up the contract and basically go do whatever you need to do was, I think, a testament to the guy who often gets bashed, who maybe doesn't deserve to get bashed as much as he did. So that was a surprise to me. Yes, sir?
One thing that's some of the connections between people in that, like, just for example, George Lynch didn't become a guitar hero until about 84,
Yes.
85, but he was kicking around in the scene.
Yeah, yeah,
77. I
yeah,
had no idea. That's something I learned from your book.
yeah, yeah.
Were there a lot of things like that that you learned?
Yeah, let me talk about that. So one of the things I grew up a guitar player. I never got past the intermediate stage. I was just one of those things. No matter how hard I tried, I just never got very good. But I had the right influences, right? I liked Eddie Van Halen, I liked George Lynch, like Jimmy Page, all these guys. Loved all the great guitar players. And so the scene in Los Angeles in the late 70s was one of these situations where you had a lot of guys who went on to be very successful pro guitar players who were playing in bands who weren't signed, but were playing alongside Van Halen. So I'll give you one example. I interviewed a guy named Rusty Anderson. Rusty Anderson was a band called Eulogy. Rusty Anderson played a lot of gigs with Van Halen and Eulogy. Rusty Anderson now plays guitar for Sir Paul McCartney. So talk about a great gig. He's one of Paul McCartney's guitar players. I interviewed him. George Lynch, another guy, Tommy Gervin, plays guitar for Eddie Money. I go down the list of these other guys. These very, very guys who are working musicians who are successful, who are around, and they were able to tell me about Eddie, and they basically were like, yeah, Eddie was the man. They all were like basically like, yeah, he was. I mean, when I heard it from guys like Mark Kendall of Great White, who at the time was a teenager, he wasn't playing, he was like 14 years old, and told me these stories, you realize these are guys who are successful guitar players who have gold and platinum records, telling you, yeah, I stood in the backyard and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was into Robin Trower, I was into Bad Company, and I see this kid doing this playing that just blew my mind. You know, when I heard it from those guys, I mean, that really helped. I give the story to me a lot of richness and a lot of truth where, you know, I hope gave it some grit to say, look, this is the real deal. These are not like some clowns who were just like, you know, half drunk standing in the backyard. These are guys who came to watch Eddie play because he was so great.
I would have never guessed Chris Holmes introduced Eddie to the guy that taught him to tap.
Yeah, well, yeah, and Eddie's been kind of reticent to talk about that, but yeah, the story about the tapping, yeah, that's another guy. Yeah, that whole story. We'll talk about that maybe afterwards. Yeah.
It kind of dovetailed that within your interviews about more the mid-70s period for Van Halen. I'm a share my Uber fan up here. Was there any talk of Randy Rhoads, kind of the rivalry between Randy Rhoads?
Yeah. So yeah, everybody knows, right? Randy Rhoads was a guitar player with a band called Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot never made it in the 70s. Randy Rhoads goes on to play with Ozzy Osbourne and record some of Ozzy's best songs, and it becomes this guitar legend. You know, I think that stuff is. I never heard anybody talk about that. I think that stuff is probably now much more of an internet creation. I mean, again, I don't know. I mean, for all I know, right? Obviously, I didn't talk to everyone. I don't know every story. Maybe Eddie Van Halen, and they had a fist fight someday. You know, someday. No, I didn't know about it or something. But I think a lot of that was more. I mean, Eddie was shy, Randy Rhoads was shy. I highly doubt there was some sort of like, I hate you rivalry. In part because, honestly, by the time Quiet Riot was coming up, to actually even start to think about playing some of the better clubs in Los Angeles, Van Halen already had a record deal. So you have a record deal with Warner Brothers, why are you worried about it? I'm not saying he didn't respect him as a guitar player, or didn't, you know, maybe think he was a nice guy, but I don't think that Eddie saw these guys saw him as a threat. You know, it's hard to know, in part because Eddie's become so beloved, how honest people are being about their looking back on those times of what their view of Eddie was. But all those guys told me that, you know, look, Eddie was the man. I mean, he was the guy. He was the best. And I think history's proven that out to be true. I see somebody else with a hand up? Yeah. Yes, sir. It's going to be in my tombstone.
Well, how is writing the book and doing all the research and all the interviews affected you? Are you any more or less of a fan?
Yeah. There are things that you learn in the process of writing a book like this that people ask you not to print in the book, and there's stuff I had to leave out of the book for a good reason, that you sort of look at, it's like anybody's life. If someone was digging into my past, there are things I've done I'm not proud of, and I would not be happy to have published into a book, and those things didn't go into the book. So it's interesting, you find things out because you find out of so many personal interactions, some things that, make you maybe admire the band members less than you would have before. But, on the whole, taking it from the whole, as I said, it's made me a different type of fan because I feel like I have this base of knowledge now that sort of makes like all the mythical things that I thought when I was 15 and 18 and 22 years old kind of are gone. But just again, how hard those guys worked and how really in 1977 and 78, soft rock, disco, and punk rock dominated sort of the pop culture. Punk rock was going to be the next big thing that was going to be the next aggressive music form. Disco was all over the radio. Linda Ronstadt, the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack sold. Was it number one for almost all of 1978. For Van Halen to be successful in that environment, to me, again, just how long those guys had worked to make it, and then for those guys to break through in that year, to me, just raised my admiration for them. Yeah. Oh yeah, that is him. Yeah, that is him. Yeah. So there's a part in the middle of the song where there's a talking back and forth. Yeah, he told me that they were goofing around, and then they went back and edited that into the song. Yeah, he's full of great stories. He's an amazing man and a very modest person, and he was a house producer for Warner Brothers for a lot of years when Warner Brothers was the biggest label in the world. And so, yeah, to be able to talk to the guy who worked in the studio with them was just a special thing for me. Yeah. So yeah, that was Templeman's voice on there. Yeah.
Does he still talk with the band? How's their relationship?
Yeah. So what would I say about that? Let me be careful what I say there. He hasn't talked to those guys in a long time. There was a falling out that happened somewhere along the way, I think, for reasons that may not be totally clear to Ted what exactly is at the root of all of it, but he hasn't talked to those guys in a long time. I know that he has told me over and over again that Eddie's a nice guy. Eddie's a nice guy. I like Eddie. In other words, feels, I think, sort of a bit of regret that the relationship has gotten to a place where it's not, they don't talk anymore, but has nothing he had nothing but positive things to say, especially about the beginning with those guys. And things went sort of south, and they had a long run together. They had 6-8 years together, and that's sort of a situation, I think, with a lot of, it's rare for any one band to work with the same producer for that many albums, so things have sort of run their course. But he's enormously proud of the work he did together. He told me, working on 1984, how many times they recorded the Lamborghini. So there's that whooshing sound during Panama, like we're running a little bit hot tonight. There's that whoosh. And he said they spent like 2 days trying to get the Ferrari and the Lamborghini, Eddie's Ferrari, and then they're backing it up and they're putting the microphones to try to get that whoosh just right. Being the producer and they really wanted to work on that part. And working on Hot for Teacher, that David Lee Roth brought in kids' desks into the studio at 5150. They had basically set it up like a classroom so they could do the breakdown parts with the parts like they're supposed to be kids in school, and just how creative Dave was and how hard they worked on those songs together. So I think he's, I don't want to speak for him, but I would say he doesn't have any regrets about it. I think he probably regrets that he hasn't talked to him in a long time, those guys. Well, if there's no other questions, I'm happy to sign a book, sign a koozie, whatever, and you can talk to my lovely wife out there. It was nice. Now, thank you guys for coming. This was an awesome event. I'm still thanking you guys. Thank you. It was awesome.
Denise, if you'd come down here real quick. I just want to say thank you. It was a